Hi, everybody, and welcome to Archives Live. I'm Samantha Mackey, and I'm here with David Peters today, head of OSU Archives. David, how are you?
I'm doing just great.
So today we're in Heritage Hall, and we are going to talk about athletic traditions on campus today. So when did sports programs first make their appearance on campus?
Initially, we had more or less intramural programs. So like the freshman class would battle the sophomore class, the engineering school would battle the ag school. So there was a lot of intramural competitions. Beginning in the late 1890s, we began competing with other schools regionally. And so we'd battle with University of Central Oklahoma. We'd maybe take on OU. They'd be small colleges up in Wichita and in southern Kansas. There could be regional colleges in Oklahoma, but there would be these regional competitions. It's really not until the late teens that we began engaging in competitions on a wider basis. But we started in the late 1890s with local competitions, and then it slowly expanded into more regional and other schools.
So when I think of sports teams, I think of mascots. So how did Pistol Pete kind of become the huge mascot he is for OSU today?
So let's step back in time a little bit. Initially, all of these individual teams would have individual mascots, and they had individual colors. It's not really until the late 1890s, early 1910 or so, that we begin to develop a standard of orange and black as our colors, based on a faculty member whose father had gone to Princeton. Their colors were orange and black, and just happens to be the Princeton Tigers. And so we became the Tigers. Well, there are not many tigers on the plains. By the 1920s, though, when we joined the Missouri Valley Conference, and there already was a team, the University of Missouri Tigers, we thought they probably shouldn't have two tiger mascots in the same conference. So we began shopping around for other ideas, and by 1923 or 24, we began exploring the possibility of being cowboys. Okay, and in 1923, an older gentleman named Frank Eaton showed up in a homecoming parade, I believe. He is spotted, and people are thinking, cowboys. That guy is the epitome of the American cowboy. And so for about the next 30 years, they began looking at the possibility of a one individual rather than just the general cowboy symbol for the mascot. It's not until 1956-57 that Pistol Pete, based on Frank Eaton, becomes our official mascot. And from that point on, then that's what we use as our mascot. But he was a real person, Frank Eaton, and his nickname was Pistol Pete. And his ambiance really has taken over and become the character we know as Pistol Pete. So
cool. So if you're just tuning in, this is Archives Live, and we're here today in Heritage Hall to talk about sports traditions. If you have a question or two for David, then you can go ahead and leave them in the comment, and we will answer them live on stream. So since we're in Heritage Hall, it's inside Gallagher-Iba Arena. Can you tell us a little bit more about the arena and kind of the history of it?
So it started off with the building being called the 4-H Convention Center. And what happened is in the late 1930s, there was a fire at an ag gathering in Texas where high school students had gathered for an ag competition, and there was a fire. And so President Bennett, we also had similar ag competitions in Oklahoma, and so the ag students would come from all over the state. President Bennett, Henry G. Bennett at the time, didn't want to have a similar catastrophe like they had in Texas. And so he was able to get funding secured from the legislature to build a 4-H convention center. Now this 4-H convention center just happened to have a maple hardwood floor in it with basketball goals. And so fairly early on, they knew it was going to be used for more than just 4-H, this annual 4-H roundup. It was also going to be used for basketball. But the 4-H building wasn't completed until about 1939. Almost immediately, though, it was called Gallagher Hall after Edward Gallagher. Edward Gallagher had been our former wrestling coach, and he passed away in 1940. And the building became really known as Gallagher Hall until, it was in the 1990s, when then they have a major renovation. There have been smaller renovations through the years, but there's a major renovation. They called it Raise the Roof. And so what you see now is a whole new facade around the original building, and they raised it up a level for the fans to be able to have more fans, and also make sure they all had good sight lines to the court. and they dramatically expanded the various facilities they have around the old building. But you can still see vestiges of the old building in some of the windows they preserved, some of the doorways they preserved. And so it really was a nice blend of the old Gallagher Hall and the new Gallagher-Iba Arena.
Cool. And so how did Heritage Hall come into play?
So after they completed the renovations, I believe the woman's name was Kay Norris. I'll have to check on that. But I'm pretty sure it was Kay, kind of took it upon herself. I think she was really the person in charge. They decided to designate this area of the building as a place of remembrance and to tell the history of the sports program, the athletic programs at Oklahoma State University, beginning from our A&M days through our OSU days. And so I think Kay was really the driving force in collecting photographs. I know the archives department worked closely with her on pulling a lot of photographs and images, especially of the early years. And then, of course, she worked with the Sports Information Office with the athletic department to gather more current things. But I know we used to have a little trophy called the Douglas Cup. It was one of the early track trophies that was given out. It's I think on permanent loan now. It's in Heritage Hall. So anyway, she gathered things from a variety of different sources, put them all together here, worked with the athletic department to arrange what we now know as Heritage Hall.
Cool. Again, if you're just now tuning in, this is Archives Live, and today we're in Heritage Hall. If you have any questions about athletic traditions on campus, go ahead and leave them in the comments, and we will answer them in the live stream. What were some of the ways students got involved with these traditions?
Well, from the very beginning, we've had bands, and it started with the football program. And actually, we have a few images. We might show a few of those. But the band has always been a popular aspect of support for our athletic programs. Here's a picture. This is probably from the 70s or so. I could be off a decade or so, but this is a picture from that period. And with the bands, we also had, here's the band, the drum major. Here's an earlier band. This is from when we were still the Tigers. If you see the drum there, there's a tiger on the drum. And the first bands were just specifically for athletics. Later, by the teens and 20s, oftentimes the bands were associated with military activities, ROTC programs, early ROTC programs. And there was a military band, but they would serve double duty. They'd serve for the military, and then they'd also serve for parades regarding athletic events and attending athletic events. And then, of course, once the bands began performing on the field, then they've been known for various formations that they would do on the field. And here's one from what we used to call Lewis Field years ago, where the stadium is now, Boone Pickens Stadium. Here's a picture. I'm going to get a little off of your band question, but here's a picture showing this is Frank Eaton attending a homecoming parade. I believe this is in the early 1950s, and by this time he's in his late 80s. He's a fairly old gentleman, but he lived in Perkins, and here's a picture of him attending a parade and being part of a parade float. Here's on Old Lewis Field. You can see Gallagher Hall, or what 4-H building, in the back of this picture. So that's what it used to look like before the building that we know now as Gallagher-Iba Arena was completed. And you can see there were fans all around the field at that time. And so even at that east end of the field, there were fans supporting the team. The stadium was much smaller in this era. You're too young for this, Samantha, but beginning, in the 60s and 70s, there was power to the people. Power was used a lot, that was, I think, the time period we began using the orange power cheer. And so here's a picture showing the two signs. They finally got smart and realized they needed to have one sign on one side and one sign face the other way. But initially they just hold up one sign, and of course the fans across the field would then, say orange and then reply power. But here's the crowd using orange power, which was a popular tradition. We still maintain. And like I said, I think that started in the 70s, maybe late 60s, early 70s. Here we're talking about other support by students. Here's a group of women. They were called the Peppers. They all had, most of them had matching sweaters. There were several women's kind of auxiliary groups. And so these were made up of women who would make sure they would sit. Usually they would sit together and they would support various teams. Sometimes they'd support all the teams. Sometimes the group would be just for a specific team. But the Peppers was one popular group. Here we have Pistol Pete. This is a later version of Pistol Pete. The face, the head, has kind of morphed over time. Originally, I think it was even paper mache over chicken wire or something. Now it's much more elaborate. I think it's a fiberglass, much lighter now. But here's a picture of Pistol Pete skilling a touchdown. Here's an early group of cheerleaders. So I should have stopped. So we have band. Students have supported the athletic activities through band, through cheerleaders, playing the role of Frank Eaton, Pistol Pete. Here's a group of cheerleaders, and I think the woman on the left on the second row is Jody. I'm not going to say her last name, but I think she's my neighbor. If Jody sees this, maybe she can verify that. Here's a group of men, students, Roughnecks. And so, just like there's Roughnecks at OU, we had Roughnecks here, but it was a men's auxiliary designed to help support sports teams. They had small paddles, and in some ways they may have been a precursor to the paddle people we know now, which developed 15, 20 years ago. But the Roughnecks were a popular men's group. So I think. Well, I'll stop. Well, let me show this one more. Here's a picture early on in Lewis Field. It's a very primitive setting, but the little group there on the right is the band sitting together to perform during the game and at halftime. So I'll stop with pictures for a little bit and see what other questions you have.
William Davis would like to know, when did Bullet the horse begin making appearances at football games?
Good question, William, and my recollection is about 25 years ago, but I could be off quite a ways. But I think it was about 25, maybe 30 years ago, but that's what I'm guessing. And I think it was Eddie Finley was a faculty member in ag education, and I think he'd gone to Texas Tech and had seen something similar there. I know he was an early supporter of Bullet and having a rider on the field. And for a long time, it was a male rider, but now, of course, it can be male or female as the rider on the horse. But I think Bullet is about 25 to 30 years old. I will check and find out, and we'll try to get more specific details on that. But thank you, William, for that question.
As far as you mentioned Lewis Field, so how did they go about renovating Lewis Field into Boone Pickens Stadium?
That was a significant venture. Actually, the first Lewis Field sat further to the west and faced north and south. And so that was the first, and it was named for Lowry Lehman Lewis, who was on the faculty, and he was acting president for a short period of time of the college. And he used it as a really a math test, or what he did is he worked with students to help them learn how to lay out a track. He was really more interested in track than he was in football. But he felt that students needed to be exposed to not only to mental discipline, but physical discipline too. And so he encouraged athletic events and the track. And so he helped them lay out a track around this field that goes north and south. And they eventually named the field for him. In about 1919, 1920, when they built, it was called the Old Armory. It's now where the architectural school is located. That building then impinged on that corner of the field, and so they turned it to east and west. So by 1920, 21, Lewis Field at the time is going east and west. They added stands, wooden stands almost immediately. Then they added metal stands and concrete stands. And through the years, by the 70s, it's this large kind of metal rust bucket on the top, and then the bottom is concrete stands. And you can still see, well, you could see vestiges of that underneath the building. Most of it's kind of been hidden now. But the major expansions begin when Mr. Pickens, T. Boone Pickens, begins his tremendous support of the athletic program and the university as a whole. You know, not just athletics, but scholarships and other things that he's been very supportive of. But his infusion of excitement and contacts and support then, you know, dramatically altered the whole scope and scale of what we saw as a venue. And so it's been within this last, you know, especially last 10, 15 years, you know, where we have the horseshoe and the, you know, but every year there's nothing new. You know, this year there's the huge screen, So it just keeps morphing into something bigger and more exciting. But it was Mr. Pickens who really brought in the first suites and club area. We had smaller ones before that. It was kind of in the old press box, but it's dramatically different now. So.
Okay. So one last question before we go.
Okay.
So sometimes traditions are thought of as something that's just really, really old. But sometimes traditions can be newer. So are there any newer athletic traditions on campus that, current students may not realize are younger?
So the paddle people was one example. That's been within the last 15, 20 years that I can think of. Another one, when Les Miles was head coach, and that was also within the last 15, 20 years or so. He was the one who introduced the walk, going from the Union area down Bennett Drive to the stadium for the football players, and then the fans to line both sides. I believe it was also Les Miles who brought in the singing of the song by the players at the end of the game, where the crowd joins them and they sing. So some of these things are in a great scale of things fairly recent, but I think they're excellent additions to our traditions portfolio. And so these things, some things will fall off and some things will be added. But I think the loyalty that OSU students and fans have for their athletic teams has been one constant throughout the whole thing. So,
cool, thank you.
Sure.
To those of you who have tuned in today, thank you so much. Thank you, David,
You're
for
welcome.
telling us about athletic traditions on campus. Thank you to the Heritage Hall staff for hosting us today. If you have more interest in this stuff, you can go to the Archives Facebook page and check out the photos. You can check out the digital collections online on OkState TV or YouTube. There's videos. And we will see you next month on Archives Live. Thank you so much.